The jet engines roared as the plane lifted into the night sky. Passengers settled into their seats, but tension sparked in row 7. A sharply dressed CEO, Victoria Hale, adjusted her diamond bracelet, glancing with disdain at the man seated beside her. His clothes were simple, his shoes worn, a little boy's head resting on his arm. She smirked, whispering loud enough for him to hear. "First class isn't for men like that." The man didn't reply. He only tightened his arm around his sleeping son until the turbulence hit, and everything changed. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this. Let's begin. The cabin jolted violently, a shudder tearing through the aircraft. Overhead compartments rattled, plastic cups spilled soda into laps, and passengers gasped, clutching armrests with white knuckles. The captain's voice barked through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts immediately. Severe turbulence ahead." Panic spread like wildfire. A woman cried out, a man cursed, and Victoria's polished composure shattered in seconds. Her diamond ring clinked against the armrest as she fumbled for her oxygen mask, but her trembling fingers betrayed her. The mask slipped, dangling just inches from her face. Then, warm, steady hands caught hers. The broke dad beside her pressed the mask gently but firmly over her mouth and nose, his voice cutting through the chaos with a calm she couldn't explain. "Breathe," he said, his tone steady, commanding. Her eyes locked on his. For a split second, it felt like the cabin noise faded away. His gaze wasn't one of judgment or fear. It was sharp, unwavering, the kind of look that belonged to someone who had stared down storms far worse than this. Meanwhile, the boy at his side stirred awake, his small voice trembling. "Daddy, are we falling?" The man pulled the child close, cradling his head against his chest. "No, son. We're steady. I've got you." His words weren't loud, yet they carried an authority that stilled even the passengers nearby. Victoria felt something she hadn't in years: safety. She inhaled deeply, her pulse slowing despite the violent shaking. Minutes passed like hours until, finally, the turbulence eased. The masks dangled unused around the cabin, the storm outside fading into quiet night air. Passengers sighed, some even clapped in shaky relief. Victoria, however, sat frozen. She turned to the man still holding his son, still calm as though nothing had happened. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice raw. He shifted his boy gently, tucking the blanket around the child's shoulders. Then he looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just a father trying to get home." But there was weight behind his words, a depth that made her chest tighten. She didn't believe him, not for a second. The hum of the engines returned, steady and controlled, but the cabin still buzzed with whispers of fear. Some passengers laughed nervously, others prayed under their breath. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, checking for injuries. But Victoria Hale's eyes never left the man beside her. He sat upright, shoulders squared, one arm around his sleeping boy, as if the turbulence had been nothing more than a speed bump on the road. His clothes were plain, his shoes worn at the edges, yet nothing about him felt ordinary. Victoria swallowed, her throat dry. "You didn't even flinch back there." The man shifted his gaze to her, calm and unreadable. Flinching doesn't help in the middle of a storm. Her chest tightened at the quiet authority in his tone. She wasn't used to that. People usually tripped over themselves to impress her or to avoid her. No one ever spoke to her like that, like an equal. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. "You said you're just a father. But fathers don't react like that. Not like trained professionals. The man chuckled under his breath. You've been around a lot of professionals then? Victoria bristled. I've built empires from scratch. I've seen CEOs fold under less pressure than that. And you? She paused, her eyes narrowing. You handled it like it was nothing. Before he could answer, the little boy stirred again. His small voice broke the tension. Daddy, tell me the story about the mountains. The man's hardened face softened instantly. He tucked the boy closer, lowering his voice to a gentle rhythm. Once, there was a man who carried his son on his shoulders up the tallest mountain. Everyone said they'd never make it, that it was too steep, too cold, too hard. But the man didn't give up. Do you know why? The boy's sleepy voice murmured, Why? Because every time he thought of quitting, he looked at his son and remembered. He wasn't climbing for himself. He was climbing for him. The boy's breathing slowed again, drifting back to dreams. Victoria found herself staring, her chest tightening in a way she didn't understand. That story, it wasn't just a bedtime tale. It was something lived, something endured. You're not what you seem, she whispered. He finally looked at her directly. His eyes, sharp and gray, seemed to see through her polished armor. And you're used to putting people into neat little boxes, aren't you? CEO, billionaire, broke dad, easy labels, safe judgments. Her cheeks flushed hot. No one had dared call her out like that in years. She folded her arms, trying to regain control. Fine, then tell me. What's your name? Ethan, he said simply. Ethan Ross. The name hit her like a strike to the chest. Her mind scrambled. She had heard it before, not in business circles, but in private conversations, whispered with reverence at government dinners she had once attended. Ethan Ross is Pakistan Air Force strategist, a man decorated for his role in a classified operation that had saved hundreds of lives overseas. Then, nothing. He disappeared from the public eye. Some said disgraced, others said retired. Victoria's throat went dry. You? She leaned closer, voice trembling despite herself. You're not supposed to be here. His jaw tightened, eyes flicking away for a moment before he answered. And yet, here I am. A man on a plane, with his son. That's all you need to know. But Victoria wasn't satisfied. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control of the conversation. She felt small, disarmed, and oddly humbled. Why first class then, if you're just a father trying to get home? Ethan smirked faintly, stroking his son's hair. Because the miles were free, and because my boy deserves a comfortable seat once in a while. Life doesn't always have to be about scraping by. His words weren't arrogant, but they carried weight. She studied him in silence, feeling her carefully curated image begin to crumble. For years, she had prided herself on being untouchable, the woman who could crush competitors with a smile. Yet this man, this broke dad, had protected her life without hesitation, calmed a cabin full of frightened strangers, and now sat there as though nothing extraordinary had happened. And what shook her most? He had shown her kindness, not deference, not calculation, just pure kindness. The plane lights dimmed for the overnight flight. Passengers settled into uneasy slumber, but Victoria couldn't rest. Her thoughts spiraled, her heart unsettled. Every so often, she stole glances at Ethan Ross, the man who carried himself like a soldier disguised as a nobody. Finally, unable to contain herself, she whispered into the darkness. Why did you help me? Ethan's eyes opened. He hadn't been sleeping. He tilted his head slightly toward her, his voice low but firm. Because kindness doesn't need a reason, and fear doesn't deserve to be carried alone. The words hit her harder than she expected. She swallowed, blinking away something unfamiliar. Tears. She turned her face toward the window, ashamed of how much his simple truth shook her. But she couldn't help it. She knew in her bones her life had just collided with someone who would change it forever. The wheels screeched against the runway as the plane touched down. Relief swept through the cabin. People clapped, laughed nervously, and hurried to gather their belongings. But Victoria Hale barely moved. Her gaze remained fixed on Ethan Ross, who rose with quiet steadiness, his son still resting against his shoulder as if the storm had never happened. He was the kind of man you couldn't ignore. Calm under pressure, gentle with his boy, yet carrying an authority that made even the chaos of the skies bend to him. She hated to admit it, but he had shaken her more than any business rival ever had. As the passengers funneled out, Victoria lingered near the terminal, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She watched Ethan adjust the strap of his worn duffel bag, his son's head nestled against his chest. No entourage, no driver waiting, just a man and his boy. Finally, she gathered the courage to step forward. "Ethan," she called, her voice softer than she intended. He turned, cautious, his son still half asleep in his arms. "Yes?" "I owe you," she said quickly, her words tumbling out before her pride could stop them. "For what you did back there, for me, for everyone on that plane." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should do." Her chest tightened. "No, not anyone. You kept calm when the rest of us fell apart. You saved me." The edges of his lips curved faintly. "You're alive because the plane landed, not because of me." But she shook her head, her eyes fierce. "No. I've faced boardrooms full of sharks, entire industries waiting for me to slip. But I've never felt fear like that moment, and you—" Her voice faltered. "You made me breathe again." For the first time, his composure flickered. He glanced away, adjusting the boy in his arms as if to shield himself from her words. "I told you, kindness doesn't need a reason." Victoria hesitated. She wasn't used to feeling small, wasn't used to thanking anyone, yet something in her demanded more. "Do you know who I am?" He met her gaze then, unflinching. Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Enterprises, known for breaking rivals with a smile. His tone wasn't mocking. It was simply factual, almost weary. Her breath caught. "And you still helped me." "Why wouldn't I?" he asked simply. "Because no one helps me unless they want something," she almost blurted, but stopped herself. Instead, she looked down, her voice quieter. "Most people see me as untouchable. You didn't." He adjusted his duffel bag, his son's small hand gripping his collar. "Sometimes people build walls so high, they forget they're still human on the other side. Fear doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It just strips you down." His words sank deep, raw, and undeniable. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't in years. The terminal crowd thinned, and soon it was just them, standing a few feet apart. Victoria inhaled sharply, gathering her resolve. "Ethan, I want to make you an offer." He frowned. "I'm not looking for charity." Her jaw tightened. "It's not charity. It's purpose. You have a strength, something people like me can't fake with power or money. You saved lives without hesitation. I want that beside me." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes scanning hers as if searching for deception. "What are you offering?" "A position at Hale Enterprises," she said firmly. "Not as an employee, more than that. As someone who can protect what I've built. Someone who can protect people, I need someone who isn't afraid when the world shakes. Ethan shifted his son, the boy's head lolling sleepily on his shoulder. And why me? Her voice cracked, surprising even herself. Because I've never met anyone who reminded me so clearly of what real strength looks like. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the muffled announcements overhead. Finally, Ethan sighed, brushing a strand of hair from his son's face. I left that world behind for a reason. Titles, contracts, deals, they don't interest me anymore. My son is my world now. Victoria's throat tightened. She had built her empire by sacrificing everything else. Family, love, even humanity at times. She envied the simplicity of his answer, yet she couldn't let him walk away. Then don't do it for me, she said quietly. Do it for him. You told him a story about climbing mountains for his sake. This, she gestured faintly, this could be another mountain, one where your strength changes lives. Ethan's gaze softened, flicking down to his son's small hand clutching his shirt. The boy stirred, whispering, "Daddy, home?" He pressed a kiss to his son's forehead. "Yeah, buddy, home." But when his eyes lifted back to Victoria's, they held a conflict she couldn't quite read. "I'll think about it," he finally said, his voice low. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Victoria exhaled, the tightness in her chest loosening just slightly. "That's all I ask." He turned to go, his figure strong yet humble, disappearing into the flow of the terminal crowd. Victoria stood frozen, her mind racing. For once, she wasn't thinking about mergers or profits. She was thinking about a man in worn jeans and his boy, about kindness that had no reason, about strength that didn't demand recognition. And for the first time in years, the woman who prided herself on breaking rivals with a smile felt something she had forgotten. Hope